My sister-in-law and her daughter had been crashing at my house for 30 days without paying a single dime. I had put up with everything in silence, the mess, the disappearing groceries, the skyrocketing utility bills, my husband acting like everything was perfectly fine. But yesterday, when she announced at the dinner table that she wanted to stay even longer, my husband opened his mouth to agree. That's when my 4-year-old daughter dropped a sentence so simple, so painfully honest, that a dead silence took over the entire room. And it was that childish little sentence that made the whole facade crumble all at once. But before we keep going, make sure you're already subscribed to the channel and drop a comment below. What state or country are you watching this video from? We love knowing how far our stories are reaching. My name is Rachel. I'm 34, I work as an accountant at a medical device company here in Seattle, and for 10 years, I saved every single dollar that passed through my hands. That 2-bedroom condo I shared with my husband, Ryan, and my daughter, Chloe, was the physical proof of all those sacrifices, of passing up vacations, new clothes, anything that wasn't strictly essential. It was small, but it was ours, and I took care of it with an almost obsessive devotion. My sister-in-law, Vanessa, showed up on a Thursday night. I still remember the exact detail because I had just finished giving Chloe a bath and was blow-drying her hair when I heard the doorbell ring. Ryan went to answer it, and I heard his sister's voice before I even saw her, that choked up, sob-heavy voice that signals a tragedy before a single clear word is spoken. When I got to the living room, she was already inside, dragging 2 massive suitcases and a duffel bag. Her daughter, Madison, was sitting on the floor by the front door with that lost look of a kid who doesn't quite understand what's happening, but senses it's bad. Vanessa was going through a messy divorce. Her husband kept the house, his family turned their backs on her, and she had nowhere to go. Ryan didn't even ask me. He just looked at me with that expression of someone who has already made up his mind and just needs a nod of confirmation. I nodded. Of course I nodded. I'm human, and seeing a woman crying with a kid right next to her is the kind of thing that bypasses any cold, rational thinking. I told myself it would be a week, maybe 2. Enough time for her to get back on her feet, find a room to rent, just breathe. I rearranged Chloe's room so the 2 of them could share, set up an extra twin mattress we had in our storage unit, and whipped up a nice, comforting dinner that first night. Vanessa hugged me before bed and told me I was a literal angel. I laughed it off and said there was no need to thank me, that it was the least I could do. The problem is that the least I could do turned into the absolute maximum very quickly. For the first week, she at least made an attempt to keep things orderly. She washed her own dishes, folded her kids' laundry, asked if I needed anything before using it. But that phase lasted exactly 6 days. By day 7, she was rolling out of bed long after I had left for work, leaving the girls' breakfast entirely up to me, as if we had agreed on this arrangement and I just forgot about the meeting. I would leave at 7 a.m., spend the entire day staring at spreadsheets and expense reports, pick Chloe up from pre-K at 5 p.m., grab groceries on the way home because the fridge was always magically empty despite my massive Costco haul the week prior, and walk through the door only to find the lunch dishes still piled in the sink. Vanessa would be lounging on the couch scrolling through her phone or binge-watching Netflix, looking like she was on vacation at an all-inclusive resort. Madison and Chloe would be running laps around the apartment, knocking things over, screaming, and nobody stepped in, because the only one trying to establish any rules was me, and whenever I tried, I immediately became the wicked witch of the story. Ryan would get home from work, take in the chaos, and instead of doing a damn thing, he'd sit right next to his sister on the couch. The 2 of them would quietly chat while I cooked dinner for 4 people. I'd look at that picture-perfect scene from the kitchen and feel this tight, strange knot in my chest. It wasn't full-blown anger yet, more like sheer disbelief. How does a grown adult remain so completely oblivious to the burden they are imposing? I tried talking to Ryan during week 3. I picked a moment when the kids were asleep and Vanessa was in the shower. I lowered my voice and said we needed to agree on a hard deadline for her to start looking for her own place. He let out that heavy sigh I knew all too well, the sigh that meant I was being difficult. He said his sister was in a really fragile state right now, that pressuring her would be cruel, and that I just needed to be a little more patient. Patient. As if I had been anything but patient up until then. I swallowed my feelings and kept operating like the invisible engine keeping the whole household running. Cooking, cleaning, Chloe's preschool, bills, groceries, everything fell on my shoulders. Vanessa hadn't chipped in a single penny in 30 days. Not once did she offer to cover a grocery run, or the electric bill that had doubled, or the gas bill that spiked on a Thursday forcing me to scramble to pay it. And the worst part wasn't even the money itself, it was the sheer entitlement. She consumed everything in her path like she had an unspoken, God-given right to every single thing inside my home. The day something permanently snapped inside me was an otherwise totally normal Thursday. I had bought a specific organic yogurt for Chloe, the pricey kind she absolutely loved. I tucked it away on the top shelf of the fridge, pushed all the way to the back, almost hidden. When I opened the fridge the next morning to grab it for my daughter's breakfast, it was gone. I asked Ryan, I asked Chloe, and it was Madison who answered with zero malice, in that innocent kid voice that hasn't learned how to lie yet. Mommy ate it last night. I closed the fridge door slowly. I didn't say a word. But a switch flipped, and some dark, calculating part of my brain started to coldly figure out exactly how much longer I could survive like this. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that isn't physical. It doesn't go away with a good night's sleep or a relaxing weekend. It's the exhaustion of feeling like you are the only person in the room who actually sees what's going on, and knowing that anything you say will be written off as overreacting. I knew this exhaustion intimately, because it had taken up residence in my bones over the last few weeks like a squatter who had no intention of leaving. Chloe's behavior started to change near the end of the third week. She had always been a calm, easygoing kid who slept straight through the night and woke up smiling. But she started waking up at 2 a.m., dragging her pillow into my room, and just standing in the doorway with this bewildered look, the look of someone who doesn't know how to articulate what's wrong, just that they aren't okay. I'd let her crawl into bed next to me and just lie there in the dark, listening to her breathe, trying to comprehend how a 4-year-old was already absorbing the toxic weight of a situation I could barely process myself. Madison was 6 years older and had a wildly different personality than Chloe. Loud, outgoing, entirely used to being the center of the universe. She wasn't a bad kid on purpose, she was just acting the way kids act when nobody bothers to set consistent boundaries. She'd snatch Chloe's toys without asking, claim Chloe's favorite spot on the couch, and whenever my daughter protested, Vanessa would inevitably chime in and say the youngest needed to learn how to share. The youngest was 4. Madison was 10. I would watch these dynamics play out and feel the injustice as a physical sensation, like a vice grip on my ribs. My daughter was being taught, inside her very own home, that her belongings weren't really hers, her safe space wasn't hers, and that rolling over and giving up was the only acceptable response, not by choice, but by mandate. And I was letting it happen because I was terrified of looking like the bad guy. One Saturday afternoon, I was tidying up the bedroom and found Chloe's favorite stuffed animal, a little bear she called Barnaby, the one she'd slept with since she was 2, stuffed inside Madison's backpack. I called Chloe over and asked, very gently, if she had given her bear to her cousin. She shook her head no, and stared at the floor. That tiny gesture, that defeated, eyes to the ground look from a 4-year-old already learning how to swallow her own feelings, hit me with a physical pain I wasn't prepared for. I confronted Ryan that night with way more backbone than before. I told him this wasn't just about convenience or square footage anymore, this was actively damaging our daughter. He listened, got real quiet for a few seconds, and then promised he would talk to Vanessa. I believed him. I waited. The next day, I asked how the talk went, and he dodged the question. He muttered something about not finding the right moment, that she was having a rough day. That's when I realized there would never be a right moment for Ryan. There was always an excuse to kick the can down the road. Vanessa was depressed. Vanessa was stressed out. Vanessa just needed grace. And I was shoved to the back burner, waiting for a turn that was never going to come. I started moving differently. I stopped buying anything but the bare essentials so I wouldn't have to watch it get devoured. I hid a small stash of Chloe's things in a basket on the top shelf of my bedroom closet, her favorite snacks, her juice boxes, her special detangling shampoo. Petty little things, maybe, but they gave me the illusion that I was protecting at least our absolute baseline perimeter. Vanessa picked up on the shift in my vibe before Ryan did. She had this predator-like radar for when the gravy train was slowing down. She started making passive-aggressive, passing comments, that I was acting standoffish, that I looked exhausted, that maybe I needed a spa day. Delivered in this faux concerned tone, but the subtext was crystal clear. She was testing the fences, calibrating exactly how much further she could push me. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen when I heard her on her cell phone in the living room. She wasn't bothering to keep her voice down, so the words drifted right over to me without any eavesdropping required. She was telling someone, a girlfriend, probably, that she was doing great, the condo was nice, she had all the amenities, and that honestly, she was in absolutely no rush to leave because the setup was comfortable. She literally used that word. Comfortable. I stood frozen with my hand on the kitchen faucet for I don't know how long. The cold tap water ran over my wrist while I thought about that word, comfortable, and how it revealed everything I ever needed to know. There was no exit strategy. There was no timeline. There was just a woman who had found a free, all-inclusive hotel and planned to milk it for as long as humanly possible. I shut off the faucet, dried my hands, and my whole mindset shifted. I stopped caring about keeping the peace, and started planning how to protect my peace. When a woman finally stops waiting for other people to do the right thing, something inside her goes cold. It's not rage, rage is loud, messy, and impulsive. It's colder than that. It's a hyper-focused clarity that only sets in after a mountain of accumulated disappointment, like when your eyes finally adjust to a pitch-black room and you can clearly see what was hiding in the shadows the whole time. I started documenting everything. It felt paranoid, even to me, but my gut was screaming that I needed a paper trail, not to blast on social media, but to ensure Ryan's watered-down, gaslit version of reality wasn't the only one on record. Note the date, the incident, the exact quotes. Document when Madison shoved Chloe and Vanessa just rolled her eyes. Document when I opened the electric bill and saw it had tripled. Document when Chloe came crying into my room at 3 a.m. for the 5th time that week. Keeping that daily log exposed a glaring pattern that had been buried in the fog of my daily grind. The situation wasn't just stagnant, it was actively escalating. With every passing week, Vanessa annexed a little more territory, both physically and emotionally. And every time I bit my tongue, she took it as a green light to push further. On a Tuesday morning, Chloe's preschool teacher called me. She told me, using that ultra-gentle voice educators use when they don't want to trigger a panic attack, that my daughter had been heavily withdrawn lately. That she was isolating herself during recess. And that during nap time, she had woken up twice screaming, crying that she didn't want anyone taking her stuff. The teacher delicately asked if there was any upheaval at home that might be triggering this night terror. I gripped my cell phone with both hands. I gave her a canned response about everything being fine and promised to keep an eye on it. I hung up and sat in a bathroom stall at work for a solid 10 minutes, just because it was the only place I knew nobody would bother me. My 4-year-old was packing her fear into her little backpack and taking it to school. She was having nightmares about being invaded in her own home. And I was still out here trying to play the accommodating, understanding hostess. That night, after the kids were down, I pulled Ryan into our bedroom and shut the door. I told him about the phone call from the preschool. I watched his face shift, a shadow of what looked like genuine guilt flickered in his eyes, but it vanished fast. Right on cue came the rationalization. Toddlers are just sensitive, it's probably a developmental phase, we can't definitively blame this on Vanessa. I listened to every word and felt the full weight of his cowardice. It wasn't malicious, he was just a man desperate to grasp at any excuse that meant he wouldn't have to make a hard decision. I told him, with a dead calm voice, that regardless of the root cause, my daughter was suffering under her own roof and that was an absolute deal-breaker. I told him I needed a concrete move-out date for Vanessa within 3 days, not a vague promise, not a soon, a hard date. Ryan stared at me with the look of a man caught in the crossfire of two loyalties, and for a fleeting second, I actually thought he was going to man up and pick the right side. But the next morning, he didn't say a word to his sister. The entire next day passed. Silence. On the night of the second day, Vanessa was sprawled on the living room couch, completely in her element, blasting some trashy reality TV show while the kids were trying to sleep. I walked in and asked her to turn it down. She lowered the volume by maybe 1 notch, didn't even make eye contact, and gave me this glacial indifference that stung way worse than outright yelling. Ryan was sitting in the recliner right next to her. He said absolutely nothing. That was the night I made some executive, practical decisions. I used my lunch break the next day to visit my bank branch. This wasn't revenge, it was damage control. A decade of pinching pennies was not going to be bled dry by a situation I hadn't created. I lowered limits on joint cards, moved emergency funds, and heavily secured the assets I had brought into the marriage. When I got home, Vanessa had clearly tried to use my credit card for a purchase and gotten declined. She cornered me in the kitchen, one eyebrow raised, asking a question that sounded a hell of a lot more like an indictment. I coldly informed her that I had restructured the household budget, and from now on, any non-essential expenses needed prior approval. Her entire demeanor snapped. For the first time since she arrived with those suitcases, the fragile, weeping victim mask slipped off entirely, revealing something much sharper and much more calculating underneath. She didn't say another word. But the silence that followed had a completely different texture. It was the heavy silence of someone reevaluating their opponent. And I knew the real explosion was still coming. Dinner that night was the most suffocatingly quiet meal we'd had since Vanessa moved in. She refused to look at me. Ryan sat caught in the middle like a guy drowning in a river, thrashing around but completely incapable of saving anyone, least of all himself. Chloe quietly picked at her food, radiating that heavy stillness little kids get when they're reading the room even if they don't understand the vocabulary. I set the table, served the food, ate, cleared the plates. I functioned. That was what I had been reduced to in my own home, a utility, not a human being. Later, while I was running Chloe's bath, I could hear Vanessa in the guest room talking way too loudly on the phone. I didn't catch every word, but I caught enough. She was whining to someone that I had cut off her money, that she was being treated like a criminal in her own brother's house, and that I was a cold, calculating bitch. Every syllable she spoke warped reality, erasing me and painting herself as the tragic martyr in an injustice she had entirely engineered. I finished drying Chloe off, wrestled her into her pajamas, read her usual bedtime story, the one about the bunny who refuses to go to sleep, and flipped off the light switch. I sat on the edge of her bed in the dark for a long time, listening to her breathing deepen as she finally drifted off. I sat there wondering exactly how much toxic tension a tiny nervous system can absorb before it metastasizes into something permanent. The next morning, Ryan pulled me aside before leaving for the office. He claimed he had talked to Vanessa the night before. He swore she promised to hit Craigslist and Zillow and start looking for a room that very week. He begged me to just hold on a little longer. When I interrogated him on the specifics, what was the deadline, what was her budget, what actual, tangible steps had been taken, he stuttered. It wasn't a plan, it was just a conversation. Vague promises extracted under pressure are worthless. I already knew that. But I just said fine, I'll wait, and went to work. A week passed. Nothing happened. Vanessa maintained her exact routine, with the only noticeable difference being a toxic chill in the air. She had dropped the grateful act, and I had dropped the welcoming hostess act. Ryan tiptoed around us like he genuinely believed pure, unadulterated avoidance would miraculously fix the tension through osmosis. Then came Friday night. The breaking point. We were all at the dinner table, me, Ryan, Vanessa, and the two girls. The conversation was strained, that brutal, artificial small talk people use to dodge the elephant in the room. Out of nowhere, with that terrifying audacity she saved for her most unhinged requests, Vanessa casually mentioned that she'd been thinking, and it would actually be best if she extended her stay. She claimed the rental market was a nightmare, that Madison was finally settling into her new school district, and that uprooting her right now would be emotionally damaging. Ryan opened his mouth. I saw the gears turning, recognized the exact cadence of the capitulation forming on his lips, that pathetic, yeah, maybe that makes sense, he relied on whenever he wanted to bypass a confrontation. And that is exactly when Chloe spoke up. My 4-year-old daughter, who was currently eating her baked ziti with a soup spoon because I had forgotten to grab her regular fork, looked up and asked, in that tiny, piercingly direct voice that only kids who haven't learned social graces possess, Aunt Nessa, don't you have your own house? The silence was instantaneous. Complete. It was like someone had yanked the power cord out of the wall. Vanessa froze with a forkful of pasta halfway to her mouth. Ryan stopped chewing. Madison stared at her mom. And Chloe just kept right on eating, completely oblivious to the earthquake she had just triggered with 8 words. The question wasn't malicious. It was just a 4-year-old applying basic, foundational logic. Grown-ups live in their own houses. If her aunt had been sleeping at our house for an eternity, didn't she have one? And if she didn't, when was she getting one? But the sheer simplicity of the question was exactly what made it lethal. You can't argue with a toddler who is just stating facts. You can't accuse her of being vindictive or cruel, because she wasn't either of those things. She was just surgically precise. I looked at Ryan. He looked at me. And for the first time in weeks, I saw something in his eyes besides his usual cowardly deflection. I saw raw, undeniable discomfort. The kind you can't excuse away. The energy in the condo fundamentally shifted after that dinner. There was no screaming match. Vanessa just abruptly stood up, announced she had a headache, and dragged Madison into the guest room. Ryan sat frozen at the dining table for a long time, staring at nothing. I cleared the plates, loaded the dishwasher, wiped the counters. I functioned once again. But as I did all that, something inside me had fundamentally reorganized itself. Chloe's innocent question had achieved what weeks of pleading with Ryan hadn't. It had dragged the ugly truth out into the harsh light, making it entirely impossible to pretend this wasn't exactly what it was. That night, after tucking Chloe in, I sat on the edge of my bed, pulled out my phone, and texted a close girlfriend who practices family law. I asked her, totally deadpan, what a woman needed to quietly get in order before filing for divorce to guarantee full custody and bulletproof her premarital assets. Hit send. Locked the screen. Stared at the ceiling. I wasn't definitively pulling the trigger right then. But it was a massive first step across a boundary I had been eyeing for weeks but was too terrified to name. There's a monumental difference between viewing divorce as a terrifying nightmare and viewing it as a real, tactical extraction plan that needs to be carefully orchestrated. I had crossed that line without even realizing it. The next morning, Ryan pulled me aside before breakfast. He said he'd been doing a lot of soul-searching, admitted the situation was totally radioactive, and swore he was going to lay down the law with Vanessa today and give her a hard, final eviction date. I listened, nodded, and offered absolutely zero validation or relief. I just told him I hoped it was actually different this time. He left for work. Around 10 a.m., my lawyer friend texted back, a massive, ultra-detailed blueprint regarding financial disclosures, asset separation, documenting a toxic home environment, and custody precedents. I read it 3 times. Saved it. Went back to work. When I picked Chloe up from pre-K that afternoon, the teacher intercepted me at the gate. Again, using that incredibly delicate tone, she informed me that Chloe had another episode during nap time, waking up absolutely hysterical, screaming that she didn't want anyone stealing Barnaby the bear. This time, I didn't hide in a bathroom stall. I stood right there on the blacktop, listening to the teacher, gripping Chloe's tiny hand so tightly I probably hurt her. When we walked through the front door, Vanessa was anchored to her usual spot on the sofa, scrolling on her phone. Ryan wasn't home yet. I walked in, dropped my work tote, slipped off Chloe's sneakers, and sent her to her room to play. I marched straight into the living room, sat in the armchair directly across from Vanessa, and spoke with a terrifying, ice-cold calm I didn't even know where I was pulling from. I told her that my daughter's teacher had flagged me down for the second time regarding Chloe's severe anxiety. I told her my 4-year-old was losing sleep, eating less, and carrying trauma into her classroom. I told her that regardless of any other issue, this was a hard line in the sand I was not willing to cross. And I told her I needed a move-out date, not a promise, a date. Vanessa stared at me for an uncomfortably long time. Then she scoffed, told me I was totally overreacting, that toddlers are sensitive to everything, and I had zero proof it had anything to do with her. I didn't take the bait. I didn't argue. I just repeated the question, what is the date? She shot up off the couch, stormed into the guest room, and slammed the door. Ryan was still at the office when he texted me, claiming he had tried to talk to Vanessa and she was having a severe panic attack, that we needed to back off and give her more time. I read the text, shoved my phone in my pocket, and finished prepping Chloe's dinner. That night, once the condo was dead silent, I opened the Secure Notes app on my phone and meticulously logged every single detail I hadn't typed out yet. Then, I created a new file and titled it, Exit Plan. I started drafting, if I pack up tonight, where do we go? How fast can I get the paperwork organized? What assets do I need to separate first? It was a surreal, gut-wrenching thing to write out, a deep, solemn grief, like finally accepting that something you desperately wanted to save can't be saved the way you imagined. But underneath the grief, there was a sharp, brilliant clarity that hurt infinitely less than the suffocating fog of the last month. I knew exactly what my next move was. I decided to go to my mom's house in Bellevue. Not running away, evacuating. I packed a go-bag for Chloe on a morning while Ryan was at work and Vanessa was still asleep. I grabbed the essentials, the birth certificates, Barnaby the bear, and walked out the front door holding my daughter's hand like it was a normal day, except my bag was a lot heavier than usual. My mom opened her front door, took one look at my face, just one, and instantly knew. She didn't bombard me with questions right then. She just scooped Chloe up, grabbed her a juice box, and set her up on the living room rug with the big bin of toys she kept for visits. Only after Chloe was totally engrossed did my mom walk into the kitchen, stand in front of me, and look at me. I spilled everything. Not all at once, it vomited out in jagged, exhausted fragments. The preschool teacher, the stuffed bear, the credit card, Ryan's endless empty promises, Chloe's devastating question at the dinner table. My mom listened to the entire monologue without interrupting once. When I finally ran out of breath, she said something so profound it anchored me. Enduring pain to protect a family is one thing. Enduring pain to protect the illusion of a family is a completely different thing. That afternoon, Chloe took the hardest, deepest nap I had seen her take in weeks. No tossing, no night terrors, no coming to find me. She just slept, a dead weight, clutching Barnaby to her chest. I sat on the edge of the guest bed watching her, feeling this chaotic cocktail of immense relief and crushing heartbreak. Relief because her nervous system was finally resting, and heartbreak because it meant the one place on earth that was supposed to be her ultimate safe haven had become a war zone. Ryan called around 6 p.m. He said he was at the condo, that the place felt weird, and he wanted me to come home. I asked him flat out if Vanessa was gone. Dead silence. Then he mumbled that she was still there, but she swore she was signing a lease on Friday. I told him I was staying at my mom's for a few days, that we needed to have a very serious conversation, and it was going to happen on neutral ground, far away from that apartment. He drove over the next day. He brought a bouquet of flowers, which moved me far less than he probably expected, because flowers are just a band-aid people use when they don't have the spine to use actual words. We sat out on my mom's back deck while she took Chloe out to the yard to water the plants. He talked. He admitted he had completely failed, that he'd been weak, that he hadn't been the husband I deserved during this whole mess. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. When he finally stopped talking, I asked him one single question: when, exactly, during those 4 weeks, did he realize I was suffering, and consciously choose to do nothing? Not as an attack, as a genuine question. He stared at the ground for a long time. Then, with a brutal honesty that actually shocked me, he said, he knew by week 2. He admitted he saw how burned out I was, he saw Chloe changing, and every single time he was faced with taking a stand, he took the path of least resistance, which was not choosing at all. That honesty cut deep. Not because I didn't already know it, but because hearing it out loud confirmed my worst fear. His blindness wasn't an accident, it was a choice, even if made out of cowardice. I didn't scream. I didn't cry in that moment. I just calmly told him that I needed time to think, that he needed to surgically remove his sister from our home, not with promises, not with intentions, but with concrete action, and only after that happened would we even begin to discuss if this marriage was salvageable. He drove away looking like a man who finally realized he was on the verge of losing something that couldn't be bought back with grocery store roses. Vanessa moved out on day 3 of my stay at my mom's house. Ryan texted me photos of her suitcases by the door, and then photos of the empty guest room, like he was submitting evidence to a jury. I didn't text back right away. I just stared at the pictures on my phone, and the feeling that washed over me wasn't the triumphant relief I expected. It was way too late for a couple of pictures to fix anything. I moved back to the condo 2 days later with Chloe. I walked through the rooms and scanned the place, the living room, the kitchen, the bedroom they had hijacked. It was spotless. Ryan had deep cleaned everything. But the drywall still held the heavy memory of everything that had happened, and I knew damn well that clean did not mean fixed. Ryan and I had some brutally honest conversations that week, long, painful, tear down the studs kind of talks. He owned his failures without trying to spin them, which was a massive departure from his usual playbook. But I had learned the hard way that apologizing for a mistake and actively changing your character are 2 entirely different zip codes, and one doesn't automatically follow the other. I kept my appointment with my family law attorney friend. Not to file the papers immediately, but to fully understand my leverage, my rights, and my actual options. She organized the documents I had pulled together, listened to my timeline, and told me I had inadvertently done all the right things without knowing it: the logbook, the timestamps, the preschool teacher's testimony. I had a rock-solid record of what had gone down. Keeping that nuclear option in my back pocket didn't mean I had to use it, but just knowing I had it fundamentally shifted the power dynamic. A few weeks later, Chloe was finally sleeping through the night again without waking up. Her teacher called me to say she was back to her bubbly self at recess, running around with her friends. That phone call was the first time in months I actually broke down and cried from pure relief, that visceral crying where your body just purges all the stress it's been hoarding without you realizing it. Ryan and I are still trying. I can't look at you and say we're fully repaired. Some fractures don't heal perfectly, they leave a scar to remind you of the impact. But he is putting in genuine, grueling work, and I am learning to spot the difference between performative effort and actual evolution. They are wildly different things. But the shift inside me? That is permanent. I am no longer the woman who bites her tongue to avoid conflict. I learned, through sheer psychological warfare, that silence isn't peace, it's just the sound of someone suffering in solitary confinement. I learned that being gracious does not mean being a human doormat. And I learned that a house is only a home when every single person inside it feels safe, especially the kids, who don't have the capacity to fake it when they're falling apart. On a lazy Sunday afternoon, I was out on the balcony watering the plants when Chloe trotted out, dragging Barnaby the bear under her arm, and asked if she could sit with me. I pulled up her little patio chair, and we just sat there watching the afternoon fade. She didn't ask anything. I didn't say anything. But the silence on that balcony felt totally different from all the suffocating silences of the past few months. It was the peaceful silence of 2 people who were finally okay, in a place that was undeniably theirs. And right then, looking down at my daughter's head resting against my arm, I realized that the absolute hell I had just walked through, the pain, the fear, the crushing loneliness of feeling invisible in my own home, was entirely worth it. Not because we got a perfect ending, because we didn't, but because I protected the only thing that actually mattered. And when push came to shove, and I was forced to choose between preserving a fake peace and defending my child, I knew exactly how to make the right choice. Sometimes, the most terrifyingly brave thing a woman can do is simply refuse to take it anymore. Now, if this story hooked you, hit that subscribe button, and let me know down in the comments, which part made your jaw drop the most. Oh, and don't forget to become a member for exclusive access to behind-the-scenes videos I don't post anywhere else. See you there.